So, the cloud. We hear that term all the time, right? But what even is it? It kind of sounds like this, magical, floaty place where all our data just hangs out. Well, over the next few minutes, we're going to pull back the curtain on all of that. You're going to see that the cloud isn't magic, not at all. It's something very real, super powerful, and honestly, a lot easier to wrap your head around than you probably think. To really get the cloud, you got to look at what came before it. The old way was, well, it was a headache. Imagine you're launching a new website. First, you have to go out and buy a bunch of physical servers. Big, expensive boxes. Then you have to manage all that hardware. But here's the real kicker. You had to guess how popular your site was going to be. And if you guess too low, your site crashes the second you get a little bit of traffic. Boom, offline. Guess too high? Well, you just spent a fortune on a bunch of powerful machines that are just sitting there collecting dust. The cloud completely flips that on its head. Instead of buying, you rent. You can focus on what matters, your actual application, and not on the hardware. And the best part? You only pay for exactly what you use. No more guessing games. And this whole idea, this practice, has a name. You guessed it, cloud computing. At its very core, it just means using a network of remote servers out there on the internet, to do all the heavy lifting, storing, managing, processing data, instead of doing it on your own computer or your own server in a closet. It's that simple but profound shift from owning the hardware to just using it as a service. That right there is the engine behind what we now call the cloud way. Okay, but remote servers, that still sounds a little vague, doesn't it? So let's make this real. Let's get tangible. Because the cloud isn't some mystical thing floating up in the sky. Nope. It's a physical, global computer built from actual, real hardware, sitting in very specific buildings all over the planet. So if we're looking at this giant global puzzle, the biggest pieces are what we call AWS regions. A region is just a physical geographic location. Think Northern Virginia or Ireland or maybe Tokyo, where Amazon Web Services groups together its massive data centers. And here's a super important point for reliability. These regions are designed from the ground up to be completely isolated from each other. All right, so now let's zoom in a little closer. Inside any one of those regions, we find something called an availability zone, or an AZ for short. You can think of an AZ as a cluster of one or more huge data centers. And this is the really clever part. Each and every AZ has its own independent power, its own cooling, its own networking. It's totally self-contained and separate from the other AZs, even if they're in the same geographic region. And this design isn't an accident. It is incredibly intentional. These availability zones are purposefully built up to 100 kilometers apart from each other. Why? Well, it's this brilliant balancing act. They're far enough apart that a local disaster, a fire, a flood, a major power outage, isn't going to wipe out the whole shebang. But they're still close enough that the data can zip between them super, super fast. That right there, that's the secret sauce. Okay, so now we know where the cloud physically lives. But how do you actually use it? Like, what does that look like? Well, the answer depends on a really big question. How much do you want to manage yourself? Because this is definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. Probably the easiest way to think about this is like layers of a pyramid or layers of control. At the very bottom, the foundation, you've got infrastructure as a service, or IaaS. This is where you get the raw building blocks, the virtual servers, the storage. You're in charge of the operating system and your apps. Now, move one layer up and you've got platform as a service, or PaaS. Here, the provider handles all that underlying stuff, so you can just focus on writing your code. It's like having a fully equipped workshop. And then at the very top, you have software as a service, SaaS. This is the finished product. You don't manage anything. You just log in and use it. And look, I can almost guarantee you've used all three of these, maybe without even realizing it. IaaS, that's the world of foundational services like Amazon EC2. PaaS, if you've ever heard of platforms like Heroku, that's it. And SaaS, come on. If you use Gmail, if you've ever used Salesforce, you are using SaaS applications every single day. See, you're already a pro cloud user, and you didn't even know it. Okay, This next part is maybe one of the most important things to understand about the cloud. Now that we know what it is and how to use it, we have to talk about security. And it really all comes down to one simple, absolutely critical rule: knowing what's your job and what's their job. This is called the shared responsibility model, and it is such a simple yet powerful concept. Here's how it breaks down. The cloud provider, like AWS, is responsible for the security of the cloud. Think about that. The physical security of the data centers, the hardware, the networking, all the stuff the cloud itself is made of. But you, the customer, you're responsible for your security in the cloud. That's your data, your applications, who you give access to. It is a genuine partnership. All right, we've covered the fundamentals: what the cloud is, where it lives, and who's responsible for what. Now we get to the really exciting part. What can you actually do with all this power? The best way to think about a platform like AWS isn't as a single thing, but as a gigantic digital toolbox just waiting for you. And I mean, in that toolbox, there is literally a tool for every single problem you can imagine. You need raw horsepower for processing? That's compute with services like EC2. You need to store just an insane amount of data or files? That's storage with something like S3. Need a crazy fast, scalable database? There are tons of them. You want to get into AI? There's an entire suite of machine learning services just sitting there ready to go. So at the end of the day, using all these different tools isn't just about cobbling something together. It's about achieving a much bigger goal. And this is summed up perfectly in what's called the AWS well-architected framework. See, the point isn't just to build something, it's to build it well. You want it to be secure, high-performing, resilient to failure, and efficient. The cloud gives you the toolbox to nail all four of those things. So there you have it. The cloud? It's not a myth, it's not a mystery, it's a real, globe-spanning network of physical buildings, all engineered for incredible resilience and packed with this ever-expanding toolbox of services. It has completely changed the game for how we build things with technology, and this incredible global computer, it's literally right there at your fingertips. So really, there's only one question left, and it's the most exciting one of all. What are you going to build with it?